Thank you everyone for joining. It's great to see this good turnout. My name is Catherine Antos. I'm the Undersecretary for Decarbonization and Resilience for the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. That's a really long way of saying that I lead efforts to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, to reduce the worst impacts of climate change, and also adapt to the impacts that we are already experiencing. And you're here today because you are part of that work. Last year, Massachusetts adopted the ResilientCoasts Plan, our statewide climate adaptation strategy, and Resilient Coasts is a key action of that plan. So thank you everyone for taking the time to participate in today's meeting. We know that there are a lot of competing demands on your time, and we're grateful for your engagement in this planning process. Your feedback and your partnership make us stronger, and it's critical to the success of the Resilient Coasts initiative. Resilient Coasts continues to be a top priority of the Healey-Driscoll administration. You know firsthand, again, that's why you're here, that our coastal communities are facing significant climate risks from coastal flooding, storms, and erosion. And I feel like, particularly in the past 2 weeks, that's just really been amplified. I've not been able to go a day without reading about wicked high tides, coastal storms, a growing awareness of current and future flood risk and how it affects our homes and our communities. We are experiencing the impacts of climate change now, and the state is committed to co-creating a high quality and implementable framework for coastal resilience through this plan. We are taking actions to keep our communities safer and make them more resilient. So we are excited to be sharing updates on the work that the Resilient Coasts Initiative has been doing with all of you today, including talking about our proposed coastal resilience districts, and most importantly, getting your feedback. I want to emphasize that what we're sharing with you today is very much in draft form. We need your input and your expertise to make this plan the best it can be. After all, this work is about state and local and regional actors coming together to identify priorities and strategies and support the people and the resources that depend on our coastal areas. I just want to say, and we all know this, we're doing this, none of these options or strategies are going to be easy, but they are imperative to protect the health and the safety and the livelihoods, the culture, the natural resources of these special areas. We're prepared to have these hard and important conversations. And again, thank you for your partnership and your input through this critical time. We have a big agenda today, so with that, I'm going to turn it back to Elizabeth to get us started. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Yes, we do have a big and full agenda, a lot to share with you all. Let me just preview where we're going before we dive in. So will start by sharing some updates on how we have been advancing this initiative since we last met with the public. Then we will, as Catherine mentioned, introduce to you draft coastal resilience districts. This is a key part of the initiative to help understand areas that share common features and provide communities a framework to collaborate together. So we'll talk through a little bit the purpose and the function of those, as well as you'll see what they look like. Then we will talk about regional collaboration. Again, the ability to sort of scale up and look regionally and collaborate across boundaries is an important way to advance coastal resilience. So we want to share with you some examples and get some feedback and ideas from you on opportunities for regional collaboration. Then we will give just a high-level overview of near-term community risk hotspots that are part of how, through this plan, we'll be prioritizing places that need near-term attention. And so we'll explain a little bit the methodology and the thinking for how to identify those areas. Then we'll have a conversation and again be looking for your input on tools for coastal resilience and ideas from you about what the state can do that is most important to help advance implementation of coastal resilience. What are the right state tools to be employing there? Then we'll spend a little bit of time explaining next steps. We're also running a survey right now that gives you the opportunity to provide input on any of this and gives you the opportunity to dig a little bit more into the districts and understand. You can share with us where you see either opportunities or challenges within your district. So we want to demo that tool for you so you know how to engage in that way, and we'll be done by 11:30 this morning. Just a few guiding principles for how we engage with each other. As Catherine mentioned, these are sometimes hard topics to work through and challenging. And so I would encourage and invite you all to just be present. We need your participation and your input. Likewise, assume good intentions from each other and also be mindful of impact. We're talking about people's communities here. And sometimes as we talk about hard topic, those conversations can land heavily. And so we want to be mindful of that and be open to one another's different perspectives. Make space and take space means that we would love you all to be chiming in, and you'll see we have a few different tools that you can use to participate and make your voice heard and also leave room for others to participate. And finally, maybe most importantly, really no technical expertise is needed to participate, and no question is bad or silly to ask. A lot of this is very technical, and if you have a question, others might benefit from the answer as well. There's a Q&A function you can use, as I mentioned, at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And so you can put questions there and we'll either respond in writing or we'll try to address it verbally. And then we'll also pause for Q&A at a couple of points over the course of the meeting. With that, I'll turn it over to Deanna Moran, the Chief Coastal Resilience Officer for CCM.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Deanna. I'm Chief Coastal Resilience Officer at the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management. First, I just want to echo Secretary Antos's sentiment and say thank you for spending a little bit of your morning with us to get an update and to provide feedback on the Resilient Coast Plan. We know how valuable your time is, and we really appreciate your partnership and participation in this process. I know many of you attended the public meetings that we held back in January. So for some of you, this reintroduction might be repetitive, but we're also going to give an update on kind of what we've been doing to date. But for those of you who were not able to participate last winter, I'm going to give a brief overview of what Resilient Coast is, in addition to that update. So as Secretary Antos mentioned, Resilient Coast came out of a recommendation from our state Resilient Mass Plan. The planning process is being co-led by the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs and the Office of Coastal Zone Management. And our goal is really to consistently, transparently, and equitably help guide state and local coastal resilience policy and management actions. That includes mapping geographic zones of vulnerability that we're calling our coastal resilience districts, as well as providing guidance and recommendations on both state-led coast-wide strategies, as well as guidance on place-based strategies that we know, folks are working on at different scales across our coastal communities. So some of you might have seen this back in January when we launched this initiative, but these are really our guiding goals for Resilient Coasts. And so you can see here we have 6 of them really covering the scale of what is at risk in our coastal communities. So not just human health and safety, but our natural and cultural resources, our built infrastructure, our coastal economy, as well as equity and environmental justice and the capacity of our coastal communities to get this work done. So first, just a couple of project updates. As I mentioned, we held a couple of virtual public meetings back in January. That was part of our wave 1 of engagement. During that wave 1, we, in addition to those public meetings, had several external and internal task force meetings. We have both an external task force and an internal working group that's helping guide the development of this plan. We also held an environmental justice focus group last spring, and we gathered feedback on those 6 goals that I just showed, indicators that we could be developing and using to help guide the implementation and tracking of success of this initiative. For the last several months over the spring and summer, we really were doing deep technical work to explore the various factors and spatial data to help define and form the coastal resilience districts that we're going to preview today, as well as compiling information about best practices on coastal resilience strategies, understanding what our coastal communities are already doing today on the ground, in helping to set forward a framework for how the state can help facilitate and accelerate that work. And some of you who joined back in January might also know that we have formally extended the timeline of this initiative. So we initially had hoped to get a plan out this summer, and we have extended that formally into this winter to help in part facilitate more robust engagement on the development of the plan. So this is just a snapshot of that timeline. You can see that the wave 1 happened last winter into the spring. We are kind of at that tail end of this wave 2, where we are in the process of developing these strategies in coastal resilience districts. And we are looking forward to a third wave of engagement later this winter, and hopefully a draft plan for public comment in this winter as well. So that is the refresher on Resilient Coasts. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing and what our current vision is for our approach to this plan. So this slide really lays out kind of how all of these different aspects of the plan come together. And what we're really going to talk with you about today are the coastal resilience districts, the community risk hotspots, and the coast-wide strategies. So saving that conversation about coastal typologies and place-based guidance for a future meeting. Our coastal resilience districts are really the kind of overarching geography that is guiding the development of this plan. They are really intended to highlight the scale at which we think coastal resilience needs to be implemented across the state, and where we hope to facilitate collaboration regionally on projects and planning. Within that, we have these kind of 2 other geographic units. One is our near-term community risk hotspots. Those are really driven by where we have a lot of people and infrastructure and other assets at risk near term of coastal hazards. And then our coastal typologies, which kind of repeat and are prevalent all across the coastline, across many of our coastal resilience districts, our beach communities, our coastal floodplains, which lend themselves to a lot of kind of different or specific strategies. And those will really feed into the place-based guidance that you see here on the right. And then, of course, we have our coast-wide strategies. So what can the state be doing at the state level through policy, regulatory, financing, and other levers to help facilitate and accelerate this work? Okay. So one of the things that we're focusing on for this set of meetings is to share with you the draft coastal resilience districts that we've put together. As was said earlier, these are very much in draft form. We're reviewing them kind of publicly for the first time and really hoping to get a lot of great feedback and insight from all of you about what we got right, what we might have got wrong, and what we should think about. So first, we're just going to kind of walk through how we came to these districts so you can better understand what our thinking and methodology was. And then we're going to show what the districts are coast-wide. That's a big map, and we don't have time to go through each and every one of the districts, but we're just going to kind of walk you through a couple of examples of what that kind of means concretely, not through each of the districts, but we, as was said earlier, are going to have another opportunity for you to kind of play around with these districts, zoom in and out on an online map viewer, and give us more kind of detailed feedback through a survey tool that we'll be releasing later today. So first, what are the purpose of coastal resilience districts? So we're really hoping that these will help create a common framework and language for everyone working on coastal resilience that will help facilitate more regional projects and partnerships where we know we have shared risks, shared natural and built infrastructure, and shared systems. And so encouraging, both knowledge sharing on coastal resilience strategies and best practices, but also a shared understanding of where we have shared natural resources, in places where a different strategy might be needed. We know that, coastal resilience is not going to be a one size fits all, but at the same time, we have a lot of places that are very similar and dealing with very similar challenges. And in many cases, we'll need to kind of come together cross-jurisdictionally to implement coastal resilience in a more cost-efficient and effective way. What these are really not intended to do is to be any kind of measure of priority. We've really divided the entire coast into these coastal resilience districts based on areas that are at near and long-term risk. And so everyone, all of those communities are in a coastal resilience district. It is not intended to be a measure of priority. It merely just puts folks together that we think, should be thinking and working together and talking to each other. And it's also not intended to be a site-specific or a project-specific tool. As we walk through, the data that helped inform these districts, you will see that this is not granular enough that we are intending it to be used for site-specific parcel-level planning. We know a lot of our coastal communities are already doing that work, that local planning work, and that continues to be extremely important and critical. This is intended to be additive, not to supplant that. Okay, so there are really three primary underlying data sets that we used in delineating these boundaries. The first one are our natural resource areas. So we really honed in on 4 critical and prevalent coastal environments that we see all up and down the Massachusetts coastline. And those are salt marshes, barrier beaches, coastal beaches and dunes, and coastal banks. And so you can kind of see here, there are definitely places where some of those coastal environments are more prevalent than others. Where we see kind of grouping of those coastal environments. And so that was really one of the primary drivers behind how we delineated the districts. The next is our watersheds and in some cases subbasins. So it was important to us to look at how water is actually moving. And we know that there's already a lot of regional collaboration and coordination across watershed boundaries. So thought that that would be informative and helpful here as well. It is not true that in all cases the district boundaries exactly align with these watershed or subbasin boundaries, but they were definitely informative in trying to understand where there might be shared flood risks and kind of opportunities for shared interventions around where water is moving and how water is coming in from the ocean. And then finally, and most importantly, our Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model provides us really great and innovative data on both current and future flood risk. So we are really focused for the kind of scope of this plan on the 2070 time horizon. So we're looking at the 0.1 annual chance flood event estimated by 2070 through our Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model. So you can see here from these maps what the extent of that floodplain, that 2070 floodplain is under this model. And in some cases, that actually brings in communities that we don't traditionally think of as being part of the coastal zone. So we have in Massachusetts, the coastal zone managed by CZM, and that includes 78 coastal communities. When we bring in this 2070 projection, we're actually bringing 20 additional communities, mostly up tidal rivers, into the geographic scope of the plan as well. So those communities are part of the scope of this plan and are included in our coastal resilience districts. And so we layered these 3 data sets together to kind of get a first cut at the delineation of those boundaries. We then did a little bit of extra work to kind of go back and QC those and make sure that we were accommodating places where we knew that regional collaboration was already happening or where folks were already kind of getting together to talk about shared systems and shared infrastructure. We also wanted to make sure that they were not arbitrarily cutting off a shared flood pathway. We want to make sure that we're encouraging, especially cross-jurisdictional collaboration on addressing those flood pathways. So it was important to us that we were minimizing doing that anywhere. And so after, going through and kind of tweaking boundaries in a number of places to accommodate those potential issues, we have come to our kind of final draft coastal resilience districts, which if you go to the next slide, great, which there are 15 out. So you can see here, the scope of the districting really runs from the New Hampshire border up by the Merrimack River, all the way down through the Boston Harbor region, South Shore, up and around the Cape and the islands into Buzzards Bay, and then up into the Taunton watershed. A couple things I want to call out here. You'll see here that these districts don't seem to align with any political or jurisdictional boundary. That is true. The inland extent of all of our coastal resilience districts is really driven by a couple of things. In most places, it is a reflection of the inland extent of that 2070 projection data. So looking out to that 0.1% annual chance storm and using that as the inland boundary of our district. In other places where coastal erosion is really the bigger issue, we added a little buffer onto those areas because coastal erosion is not captured as well by our MCFRM data. And so wanted to make sure we were accurately depicting the risk in those areas by adding in a buffer. And so, as I said, we don't have time today to go through each of these 15 districts in detail. You're going to have an opportunity to look at these on your own through a map viewer that we're releasing and to provide us more detailed feedback via a survey. But we are going to just walk through a couple of examples Again, just to kind of help you understand more about how we're characterizing these regions, the types of things that we're looking at, and how some of these places were put together and why. So with that, I'm gonna hand it over to Nasser.
Thanks, Deanna. So as Deanna mentioned, each of the districts has been characterized based on coastal resources, watersheds, and here we're kind of providing additional information about how people and development vary and flooding and erosion risks vary in these different districts. So this first one is the Great Marsh District, which extends from the state line in Salisbury south through Essex and on through the Annisquam River watershed in Gloucester. The predominant coastal resource types in this district are barrier beach and salt marsh. The district contains the largest area of salt marsh of any district, the Great Marsh, which is why it's named the Great Marsh. To that point, we are open to suggestions on title modifications for these. There's generally low population and development density within district boundaries, except in a few denser areas, such as Salisbury Beach and Newburyport. There are environmental justice populations within the boundaries of the district in Newburyport and Gloucester. And in terms of flooding and erosion risks, there's a lot of ocean-facing shores which are exposed to high wave energy during coastal storms, and which causes beach and dune erosion and beach lowering seaward of where we have coastal armoring structures. Coastal flood exposure is pretty widespread around the back shores and fringes of salt marshes. And with long-term sea level rise, expansive areas of high marsh in these areas will be lost as they become regularly flooded. Next. So moving much further south, this is the Buzzards Bay District. Extends from Woods Hole Village in Falmouth, north to the Cape Cod Canal and down through the state line in Westport. The major coastal resource types in this district are barrier beaches, salt marsh, and coastal floodplain. There's also generally lower population and development density within this district, except in a few denser areas like in New Bedford and Wareham. There are also environmental justice populations within the district boundaries in 7 of the 11 municipalities shown here. And unique from other districts, Buzzards Bay also contains a lot of agricultural land uses. In terms of flooding and erosion risks, this district has a very low tidal range, which has led to development of low-lying areas. Flood exposure is concentrated along the fringes and backshores of backshores rather, and salt marsh and other wetlands. And also because of this low tide range, salt marsh is projected to be lost sooner than in areas north of Cape Cod. Beach erosion is another issue in this district due to sediment source starvation, sea level rise, and coastal storms, which are a bit less frequent in this area, but it is uniquely susceptible to hurricanes from the south.
Thanks, Nasser. So as Deanna mentioned, we want to pause now if you have clarifying questions about what we've described about how the districts were formed and what purpose they're serving. We're asking you to save your substantive feedback about the districts for a survey that we will demo that allows you to, drop a pin and really point out places where you think extra attention is needed or something needs to be adjusted. But let me just pause and see if anyone has questions about anything we have shared so far. Feel free to raise your hand or use the Q&A function. I'll give it a minute. Got a question from David in the Q&A, and then I'll go to Kelly, but I'll just read David's question. Given the likelihood of increased hurricanes and tornadoes between now and 2070 due to climate change, is this included in the resilience districts as coastal land / forests move inland and human development moves seaward? So I think the question is sort of, are we accounting for that kind of storm intensity and the movement of the sea land interface kind of, is that right? Deanna, do you want to take that?
I'll ask Nasser to speak on that from the MCFRM perspective.
Sure.
Great.
Yes, so MCFRM, as Deanna described, the inland boundaries of these districts is based on the 2070 0.1% chance flood. And that includes a high rate of sea level rise. And also in 2070, the modeling includes more intense hurricanes and tropical storms than what we have seen historically in this area, because that's what the science is telling us is likely to happen. So yes, the tornadoes are not particularly included in this, but it does account for a high rate of sea level rise and increased intensity of particularly tropical cyclones.
Great, thanks for the question, David. Let's go to Kelly and then Brian.
Hi, thank you so much. This has been a really informative presentation and it's a really cool concept. And I love the idea of splitting these into different zones and how we think about them. Can you talk a little bit more about the implication of creating these different districts? Like, how will the government interpret the rest of these like districts now that we have these plans sort of in place?
Yeah, great question, Kelly. I think our priority in this first phase of Resilient Coasts is really to understand what the unique priorities and risks are for each of these districts and help to identify and facilitate regional collaboration around joint projects to address some of those risks. So, we're not at this stage thinking of these as, for example, like regulatory boundaries. It's really, intended to kind of guide thinking and planning around regional scale coastal resilience. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation that we're not going to talk as much about today, we are kind of looking within these districts at different coastal environments that may lend themselves to different types of strategies. So that will be part of the overall report as well, is to call out, especially as Nasser said when he was describing a few of the districts, there are some districts where there's one or another kind of coastal environment that is more prevalent. And so providing some guidance on, what are the best and most effective strategies for those different coastal environments that will hopefully help inform some of the work that's happening locally at the municipal level.
Great, thank you so much.
Thanks, Kelly. Let's go to Brian and then Antonio.
I just want to echo Kelly's thanks for the presentation. It's really, really informative and really interesting, and the districts make sense to me. I have two very closely related comments. One is in reaction to sort of the presentation of I saw this in Buzzards Bay region when you were presenting it, just talking about sediment starvation and its relationship to beach erosion. I think the first comment is just a verbiage comment. When referring to coastal erosion, I think it's really important to distinguish between whether you're talking about a beach or a bluff. The beach being sort of a depositional landscape where we need sediment being added to it, and the bluff often being the source of those sediments. So in so many of the beaches in Massachusetts, the source of sediments to the beaches is the eroding bluff that's nearby. It's not clear how to balance those needs, but if the bluffs don't erode, we don't have sediment for the beaches. And so, yeah, the first comment was just verbiage. Make sure we're clear about what's eroding. Is it a beach that's eroding or upland? And then also acknowledge that the sediment for the beaches comes from the bluffs. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian, for the comment and the suggestion on clarification. Appreciate it. Antonio, and then Julie, and then Susan.
Thank you very much, and appreciate the opportunity to speak today, and thank you for all the work that you've done so far. Speaking on behalf of a municipality, and a very small municipality with only, a $15 million budget. One of the characteristics that I didn't really see highlighted is, municipal budget, municipal resources, municipal ability to deal with the challenges that they're facing. For a town like Nahat, which is, an island community, you compare our coastal hazards to our ability to keep up with them, and we're, completely on the other side of the equation, where we just simply have a hard time as a municipality to, budget for, and keep up with all the different grant opportunities that are out there. You know, we don't have a planning department, things like that. So, you know, I think as you're looking at these districts, and it might be a subcategory within the districts of somehow identifying, you know, the municipality ability to handle the challenges that they're facing. You know, larger communities with more staff, you know, have the ability or have a better ability to, you know, chase after grants and plan for the future and keep up with, you know, the challenges that are in front of them. Small communities like Nahant, you know, it's really hard for us to keep up with the challenges that we face, and we're surrounded by the ocean. So we have it on every inch of our community is susceptible to climate change. So, you know, I think I'm not sure if it fits where it fits in or how it should fit in, but I just noticed, you know, obviously I'm going to notice that from a small town, but I didn't see any comment related to that, you know.
Yeah, thanks, Antonio.
Municipal
Yeah, totally.
size or budget and resources.
Really appreciate that, Antonio. I'm gonna hear from Julie and Susan, and then we'll try to respond to all of these questions, but we'll keep that in mind.
Hi, thank you so much. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Great. I think this is great. It's fantastic. I think that the resources will be pulled together in ways that, you know, Antonio were describing, hopefully. Question about precipitation. You know, a lot of the communities we've been working with, even right on the coast, have a lot of issues with respect to precipitation-based flooding, exacerbating the coastal flooding. Is that something that was factored in to this?
Thanks, Julie. Great question, and that has come up again. Let me hear from Susan, and then we'll try to respond to all of these.
Okay.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. So the prior person asked about, you know, how you factored in maybe potential future storms impacts. I actually have the reverse questions, which is there built into the plan, the program updates, such as you're basing it on projections. If you get 5 years out and you find that the projection that the climate change has not proceeded as projected, it's not as bad as projected, or maybe it's worse than projected, is there plans to update this on a regular basis so it doesn't become stale? And likewise, as communities are starting to implement resiliency projects, which may raise certain areas of the coast out of the projected, you know, floodplain levels. So just a question about suggestion about building in updates to make sure that this doesn't become stale or outdated, and require or, you know, restrict based on outdated information. And then the second one is and I'm hoping you'll touch on this later as you're going on, or maybe at a future date, is, you know, there's all these pending regulations from DEP related to land subject to coastal flooding, which have raised a number of concerns because they seem to be more focused on retreat than resiliency. And coastal communities who really depend economically on their coasts are concerned about having to retreat and losing either economic drivers or community resources, such as community boating facilities, those types of things. So if at some point today or another day, you can speak to how your project is working with or not with what DEP is doing on the new regs.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Maybe could I suggest, Deanna, do you want to respond about the municipal capacity issue and this coordination with DEP, and then we can have Nasser take the other two?
Sure. Well, so a couple things. I want to take them in reverse order. So on the question of, you know, what is our plan for updating? Yes, absolutely. We don't want this to be static. We are going to have plans to periodically revisit this, update the science, update our strategy. Part of the benefit of doing this way now is that, as you mentioned, you know, we know a lot of our communities are doing projects as we speak. And so we can help kind of track that regionally and, where they're helping to address those shared risks, and hopefully incorporate that into future phases as well. So we are very much thinking of, this first plan as a phase one, and there will be future phases, and there will be plans to periodically review and update both the science and potentially the boundaries as well. On the municipal capacity question, yes, definitely hear you. That is part of our thinking. It's one of the reasons why we are hopeful that thinking about the coast in this kind of district framework will actually help us pool resources across districts. We have in most of these districts, a community or two that is very high capacity and well-resourced, and we really want to be encouraging those communities to be working with their smaller municipal neighbors who maybe don't have as much technical capacity or resources, and to be pooling those resources to address shared risks. So I think, as we start to talk about implementation of the plan and how, what is the state's role in helping to facilitate this regional collaboration, that's one of the things we're really looking to hear from you all on, is like, what is most important? What would be most useful? How can we help support and accelerate this work? So glad that you're all thinking about that, and we definitely want to get your feedback on that. And there's actually going to be an opportunity for that later today in the meeting. On the question about other agencies, coordination, absolutely, there's a lot happening on coastal resilience and resilience generally right now. We know that we're working closely with those agencies. As I mentioned earlier, we have an internal work group as well as an external task force that's helping guide the development of the plan. DEP and other agencies at the state are part of that internal work group, and so we're closely coordinating with them on that. And then on the precipitation and sea level rise flooding question, Nasser can chime in as well. MCFRM does not take into consideration changes in precipitation. This is not a compound flood risk analysis. We recognize that that is a shortcoming of our current approach, and really it's just a lack of data that we have at this point to be able to incorporate that. But is definitely something that we're thinking about for future phases. And so, right now the coastal resilience districts are very focused on unique kind of coastal hazards, storm surge, sea level rise, erosion. In future phases, we do hope to be able to incorporate more of a focus on compound flood risk, which would include not only precipitation, but riverine and stormwater as well.
Yeah, I'll just add that the state's, actively working on advancing analysis of mapping of future flood risk from precipitation. And as part of that analysis could use data from the coastal model to better understand compound risks. We don't, every community has stormwater infrastructure, and often that's the first place that flooding starts to bubble up into streets that people see, is coming through storm drains. Some municipalities don't even have that infrastructure well mapped. So to do that statewide is really, not currently achievable, but is something that communities are doing on an individual basis to better understand those risks.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Susan and Julie and Antonio and others for the questions. If you have other questions, we would love if you could put them in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to keep responding to them. For time, I'm going to move us forward now, and I'm going to hand it to Julia Neisel, who manages the coastal shoreline and floodplain programs for CZM, to walk through a few examples of regional collaboration to give us a sense of the kind of regional scale projects we're hoping that this framework can help encourage and foster.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to join you and talk about 3 examples of how communities have been working together over the last 5 years to address growing risks from coastal erosion and flooding. The first example here is from the South Shore in Marshfield and Duxbury. Those 2 communities received a coastal resilience grant to work to design and permit and also construct a large-scale beach nourishment project across their town boundaries. These areas along the South Shore have seawalls and are particularly exposed to northeast storms. So we were happy to see these communities collaborating to do a larger scale nourishment in a more efficient way. when communities work together, they save time and resources spent on the design, permitting, and mobilization of equipment to implement these projects. Next project is from the Cape. We have an example of communities on the Outer Cape collaborating from Provincetown to Eastham. These communities initially worked to identify how sediment is moving within the nearshore environments and has ultimately developed a data portal to inform local management decisions. I encourage you to go online and look at the resource that they developed to inform local decision making and to work in the long term at prioritizing where sediment should be placed within the system to maximize the benefits of that. And then finally, going back to the Boston Harbor region, the communities along the Island End River, which is a small offshoot of the Mystic River, have been working together to address a major flood pathway in this urban industrial system. Chelsea and Everett have worked together to design, permit, and now work towards construction of a variety of shoreline adaptation measures to address flooding. The measures include flood walls, but also nature-based approaches along the shoreline. And this effort was very much supported by a number of nonprofit organizations, and they also engaged with the community members throughout this project. Now that they're looking to implement their adaptation strategies, they are working to secure a $50 million federal grant through FEMA's Building Resilience for Infrastructure and Communities. And we're really happy to see that these communities have leveraged both CZM Coastal Resilience and EEA Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness grants to get to this point. So I'll pass it back to Deanna.
Great. Thanks, Julia. Okay, so I think next we're going to kind of pause. That's a lot of information for everyone to take in. You guys have been really engaged, which we really appreciate. We want to pause here and have you think in the context of your district or this kind of districting approach generally, you know, what you think types of projects and issues could really benefit from this district scale collaboration. So I'm going to hand it over to Elizabeth, who's going to kind of tee us up with a Mentimeter poll.
Yeah, thanks so much. I just put a link in the chat. This is Mentimeter is a tool you all might be familiar with. It's a way to allow folks to put comments in and you all can see each other's comments, but you're also welcome to use the chat or other tools as needed. You can click the link that I put in the chat, or you can use your phone and join via the QR code on the screen. And what we want to hear from you all is, given the kinds of examples Julia shared, what kinds of projects or issues in your mind would benefit from district scale collaboration, and how can the state best support this collaboration? And to the extent that you're making a specific place-based recommendation, if you could identify your community or your region, that would be really helpful. So again, I'll give folks a minute to get logged on here, and we would love some feedback from you all in the Mentimeter. Seeing some comments coming in already. The protection and restoration of wetlands is a great example of a place that obviously an issue that doesn't respect jurisdictional boundaries and needs sort of, you know, coast scale, regional scale thinking. Right now we're in business here. Managed retreat. Amelia Earhart Dam as we get further along and risk upriver becomes a greater concern. Gonna take this. Another number of comments about marsh restoration efforts, dealing with CSOs, managed retreat, quite a number. We're not going to be able, obviously, to pursue or dive into all of these right now, but really appreciate your naming these because these ideas will help us think about what the state can be doing to support these kinds of collaborations. A couple more come in here. A couple of folks have pointed out tools and strategies to support resource sharing across districts. Someone else also pointed out support to help communities within one municipality or across municipalities align on goals and their vision of how to become more resilient. Obviously, not everybody has the same priorities or concerns, and so support for those conversations is really important too. Let's see. Helping encourage collaboration across local, state, federal levels. Collaborative approaches to dealing with insurers, interesting. Risk assessments at a watershed scale, great. So really appreciate all of these ideas. This really helps us think about what the framework needs to do and what kinds of priorities for regional collaboration the state can support. If any of you have ideas about how you would see the state helping communities and regions tackle these issues, that also is feedback that's really appreciated. I'm going to leave this Mentimeter up so you all can keep putting in comments. And for time, I'm going to move us forward to talking about this near-term risk hotspot analysis. But please do keep putting comments in there, and I'll turn it back over to Deanna.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So if you recall the kind of approach to this plan slide, you saw that we had kind of 3 interrelated different kind of geographic units that we're looking at as part of this plan. Nested within these coastal resilience districts, one of the things that we're thinking about is places that are at nearer term risk. So as I said, the time horizon that we're really planning for with Resilient Coasts is that kind of 2070 longer term time horizon, looking at the 0.1% annual chance storm. But obviously there are a lot of places on our coast that are facing much nearer term risk for 2030, which is a mere 5 years away. And so to address that, we are looking within the districts for these community risk hotspots. And if you go to the next slide, the purpose of this exercise is, as I said, to really identify those places where there is a confluence of people, housing, infrastructure, and economic resources exposed to 2030 coastal flood hazards and other risks, and to hopefully help inform some district level prioritization for federal, state, and local, and even private resources and intervention. And so the way that we're thinking about this is really to kind of map it as, if you go to the next slide, Elizabeth, map it as 3 distinct categories. So we have here people and housing, public facilities and infrastructure, which also contemplates kind of public services, and then economic resources. And so we don't have a version of this hotspot mapping to share with you today. We're still in the process of doing this and hope to share it in a future meeting. But we are kind of gathering different data points and inputs for each of these 3 sectors with the goal of mapping them across all of our coastal resilience districts and finding those places where we have a lot of things at near-term risk. So for example, in the people and housing category, we would be looking at data like how many people are at risk, how many of those people are in environmental justice communities, what is the total value of housing that could be damaged in certain areas of the coast, and that kind of thing. In public facilities and infrastructure, we're looking at roads and rails and municipal services like fire and police, at our hospitals and our health centers, all of that really critical infrastructure, energy assets that could be at risk. And then finally in economy, looking at, there's some overlap, but looking at things that are unique to our coastal economy, our designated port areas and working waterfronts, job density, and freight rails and roads and things that we really rely on to continue to be able to operate our economy. So that's kind of how we're thinking about this exercise. And as I said, we don't have a version of this to share with you today, but wanted to preview it with you and let you know that we'll be coming back in future meetings to show you kind of what this looks like. But this is our way of really balancing, our longer term time horizon for the overall plan, and also acknowledging that there are some places, within our coastal resilience districts that are at much nearer term risk. Okay. And then the final section of what we want to talk to you about today is these state tools for coastal resilience. So again, if you think back to that approach to the plan slide, what we're hoping to include in the ResilientCoasts Plan is a combination of state strategies and tools, as well as guidance for our local coastal communities who are doing this work. And what we're really focusing on today is those state tools. So if you go to the next slide, this is just to kind of, we have a Mentimeter question that we're going to pose to you and have some discussion about this. But this is just to kind of orient you to what we mean when we say state tools. So these are just some examples. Obviously, the state is doing a lot of work around both coastal resilience and resilience more generally. This is just to give you an example of some of the places that we're already kind of layering this into various state tools. A few of these have already come up today, including regulatory requirements. But we've kind of categorize them into these three broad buckets: policy and regulation, funding, technical support and capacity building, and planning and coordination. These are certainly not, the only buckets of tools, and you are free to think outside the box and outside of these categories when you're giving us your feedback on what would be most useful. This was really just to kind of give you a sense of how we're thinking about it and examples of what some of those tools might look like. And so for this next exercise, what we're really hoping is, thinking back to kind of what we've laid out as part of the plan and the framework so far, what is the state's unique role in accelerating and facilitating some of this work? And what are the tools that would be useful to all of you who are doing this work on the ground to really accomplish the goals that we've set out and to work together on coastal resilience? So with that, I'm going to pass it to Elizabeth.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Deanna mentioned, we want to hear from you the examples of tools that you would find most important and effective to scale up coastal resilience implementation. I have just advanced the Mentimeter poll to ask this prompt. I'll leave up these examples here for just a minute while folks start to respond. And if you need that link again, I will put it in the chat again. I hope that these examples are some inspiration, not exhaustive, obviously. We're getting a couple of responses in here already. Some ways that folks would see state action really unlocking or scaling up or accelerating coastal resilience at the community and regional scale, reducing time to get a Chapter 91 permit, getting ahead of the insurance industry. That would be ambitious, and state procurement that municipalities can just use rather than run our own, DEP regs, streamlining permitting, or potentially overhauling the permitting process. That right now this person is saying it's very hard, expensive, and time consuming. More comments on Chapter 91, help for municipalities and regions to get federal grants related to that response that Nasser provided earlier: stormwater system mapping and precipitation-based flooding data and modeling. Definitely a goal for the future. Capacity issues, so helping provide planners and technical assistance at the local level for their grant opportunities. More on permit streamlining for restoration projects. Grants for construction, not just design and engineering. More money to support the doing and the implementing, getting beyond planning. More about technical assistance, the need for coordination between state and federal entities and across state borders. feedback about support for Indigenous tribe rights of nature campaigns, permitting assistance, Chapter 91, yes. Funding for people and infrastructure, not just ecological restoration. Working, so again, this is sort of like the capacity boost, working directly with town managers and municipal staff. Really appreciate all of these ideas and this feedback. Seeing a lot about these capacity issues, seeing a lot about the sort of like unlocking sort of stoppered up points in the regulatory or grant application process. Some about need for good guidance. And here's a feedback about keeping guidance separate from regs. Science and practices evolving quickly. And then again, the need for money to actually implement getting beyond planning. Really appreciate all of this. Resilient Coasts team, let me know if there's anything that I am missing or that you want to chime in on. This is an interesting idea. Looking at all of the recent grant applications, where there's some that didn't get funding that should have, and going back to there. Building code issues, right? So there's the sort of restoration projects, and then there's also the design considerations for infrastructure. And I think we have time for a couple of verbal comments if folks want to chime in as well. If there's anything that you wrote that you want to elaborate on, or themes you're noticing that you want to lift up, we welcome your input. Ashley, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I've done some of the listening like this in the state of Maine as well. And I know the state has been providing funding to regional economic councils and some other NGOs to support the municipalities in applying for funding and contracting with engineers to do the work and sort of doing that project management. I know Maine, are far more understaffed than municipalities in Massachusetts, but that's proven fairly effective. And the state's even been able to get private foundation support through the Maine Community Foundation to then funnel to those service providers as well. So one model to help the municipalities with the implementation of the planning.
Yeah, thank you. Great point. And we are doing some of that already through our existing grant programs and encouraging regional applications and allowing for regional entities to be the grantees of those projects. But definitely a good point and something that we're thinking about for the implementation stage of Resilient Coasts.
Thanks, Ashley. Others? Seeing a few comments that are also related to helping folks know the range of funding sources that are out there, or sort of, sorting and categorizing them so people can do some matchmaking to figure out what sources are best for them to pursue for a given project. Great. Deanna, in a minute or two, do you want to switch over and we can show people the tool to give more input also on the districts, and then we could take some more questions as well?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, great. Let me know when you've got that tool ready and I'll take this down.
Yep, you can go ahead and we can switch.
So folks, you can keep making comments in that Mentimeter. It's still open, but we're going to show you this survey tool as well.
So we will put the link to this survey tool in the chat. We'll also follow up with an email to all of the participants from our meetings this week so that everyone has it. And we hope that you'll share it with your colleagues and other stakeholders so that we can get a lot of participation on it. But I'm gonna walk through it really quick just because there's parts of it that maybe are not as intuitive. And we're also recording this meeting. So if you find yourself not remembering exactly how to fill it out, you can go back and look at it for guidance. So this is a survey to collect your feedback, both on the coastal resilience districts that we previewed today, but also just more broadly on the report and our approach, and anything that you think, you want to surface for us or raise up for us that we should be thinking about as we're developing the rest of the report. So the beginning is kind of standard, your name, who you're representing when you're filling out the survey, whether it's yourself or some an organization you work for or a municipal government. We'll ask you to just identify the community or communities that you are representing in your opinion on the survey. We know, for some folks that might be the whole state or the whole coastal area, and that's fine. You can just kind of write that in there. And then we'll ask you to identify which coastal resilience districts are most relevant to you and which ones you're providing feedback on. You are able to select more than one here. You could select all of them if you wanted to, but that just helps us really kind of orient your feedback in the context of the districts. And I will point out here, we'll just toggle really quick. There is a link here. This is cross-linked to our coastal resilience district map. I'm going to show you another way to get at this map outside of the survey, but if you're taking the survey, this is a pretty easy way to get access to it. So if you click this link, it will take you to our online viewer. A little disclaimer here about the data in the viewer. That's out of that. And then you're able to, this online viewer, zoom in and out of these districts. So you can see on the right-hand side, there's a legend of which districts are which. They're color-coded. It allows you to kind of toggle all around the coast to see these districts with a little bit more detail. And so this will probably be very helpful to all of you as you're filling out that survey. I will just note that there is a certain extent at which if you zoom in too close, it goes away. That is just a function of the map. So don't worry that your computer's not working. That is supposed to be that way. And if that happens, just zoom out a little bit so that it will pick back up. And you can see here that the survey is also cross-linked up here in the right-hand corner. So if you lose the survey link, that's another way to find it. So going back to the survey, we have a box here for you to just provide us with any feedback you have in the coastal resilience districts themselves. And then this is where we start to get into broader feedback about the plan and about the approach. This first question is asking you to give us your priorities for what you think is most important to be part of the ResilientCoasts Plan. For this question, you are going to click on one of these priorities and you can drag it. So they are prioritized from 1 to 8, with 1 being the highest priority and 8 being the lowest priority. So if I want to take number 4 and make it number 1, I would click it and drag it up so that it's in the number 1 position. And you can do that with these other ones as well. There is an other category, which you're welcome to use. And if you want to elaborate on what that other category means to you, there's a box here for you to provide us some more information about that. Then we have this mapping exercise. So this is the one that maybe is not so intuitive and we want to spend a little bit of time demoing. So you'll see here, you can just kind of click on this map. You'll get this kind of pop up. You can click out of those. And then this is the same map that you saw in the other viewer. It's just showing you the various district boundaries. And same as the other viewer, you can kind of toggle around the coast and zoom in and out here. And what we're asking you to do with this question is actually drop pins on the map. So the way that you would do that is once you get to the location where you want to provide a comment, you would click and you'll see this little location marker pop up. And then what you'll do is you'll identify the spot that you've marked as either an opportunity or a challenge and provide a brief description of what information you want to give us about that location. And up here in the instructions, you can see that we give some guidance on what we mean when we say opportunity and challenge. The examples of opportunities we've provided here are things like shoreline restoration, community engagement, infrastructure retrofits, or challenges, shoreline erosion, downtown flooding, infrastructure damage, that kind of thing. You can put as many points on the map as I think you want. To do that, once you've kind of dropped this first pin and then put in a description of it, you'll just go back up here to the top you'll see that the 1 is green because that's the one you've just done. If you want to do another one, you simply press this plus button and you'll see another one pops up. You'll do everything that you just did, including Xing out of these boxes, zooming in on the map to where you want to drop the next pin, dropping the pin, and then doing the same thing. And you can just do that as many times as you want. You just keep pressing the plus button and they'll all populate up here. And there's nothing else for you to do. So once you're done, if you've done 3 of them and you've decided that's as many as you want to do, you can simply just keep scrolling down to the rest of the survey. There's one last question that just asks you to let us know if there's anything else that you, any other information or things you want us to know as we develop the plan. You can put your answer in there and then you'll press the submit button. The only other thing I want to point out to folks, I know I said we're going to send the links to all of this stuff around, but just want everyone to be aware that we do have a Resilient Coasts landing page. It's pretty easy. We can put this link in the chat as well. It's pretty easy to find on the mass.gov website, also pretty Googleable. But this is really where you will find all of the information on Resilient Coasts. And this is a really great page to bookmark if you're following the process because it is continually updated. So you can see here that it has all of our engagement opportunities, including past opportunities. So the presentations that we gave back in January are linked here, both in video format and the slides. And there's also a section on upcoming opportunities. So as we are posting new public meetings, those will populate here. When these meetings are ready to be uploaded as we've recorded them, they will be available on this site as well. And then, of course, the public survey as well as the map viewer are also linked here. So if you lose the links, you can always come to the Resilient Coasts landing page to find all the information that you need.
Great. So I'm just going to name the next steps, and then we do have time for more questions and comments, but just so that everybody has information, I put the link to that landing page Deanna just mentioned in the chat. And again, from there, you can get to this survey, this mapping tool, also where the recordings will be made available. We hope you respond to this survey and also share it with your networks, neighbors. It's open until November 18th. We will be holding another public meeting later this fall or early winter, and please keep an eye on that page for updates. And as well, I think you can sign up to receive CZM updates, and the meeting will be publicized via that listserv. And then a draft report will be expected for public comment later this winter, and certainly we'll be eager for your feedback on that once the report is put together. But we'll hold the next meeting before then. Deanna, any other next steps we should note before we open it up to questions?
No, I think we can open it up to some questions. We're running a little ahead of schedule today, which is rare. So we can have a couple more questions, and if folks wanted to raise their hand or put anything in the Q&A, we can spend the next 10 or so minutes doing that.
Great. Also, just note in the meantime, while folks are putting their questions together, Nasser put some resources related to the questions about where to find funding opportunities in the chat. So you may want to check those out. Any questions, folks? Janet, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I was just looking at the website and looking at the district's map, and it's really interesting, and it raises lots and lots of questions, as you would expect. But I'm looking for the data that Nasser had described when he walked us through the 2 examples. Is there somewhere on the site that we can look at what went into the determination of these districts?
So the 3 data layers that we had walked through that were really the primary data sets that went into the delineation were the watersheds and subbasins, the MCFRM data, and the natural resource data. Those data are all publicly available. They are not part of this map viewer. So I don't know if maybe somebody from the team can put the link to the MCFRM data in the chat. That kind of lives in one place on the state's website. The other data, the watershed subbasins and the natural resource data, is available to be downloaded and viewed through the state's GIS website. It's called Mass Mapper. So maybe if somebody could put those 2 links in the chat. They are publicly available data. They just are not populated in this map because we wanted to make sure that this viewer was really focused in on the district boundaries.
Thanks. Janet, did you have a follow-up or is that?
I just to follow up. I understand all of that about those data sets, and some of them are large and complex. But what I was really wondering about was the analysis that went into when Nasser was describing them. He described in general terms the predominant resource features of these districts and why they were put together in the way that they were and what they shared and common risks and things like that. Is there any way to get a better understanding of how these districts were created?
I think I understand your question. I want to clarify something. So the district descriptions are separate from the delineation. There's a certain amount of analysis that was done once the districts were delineated to summarize what the primary characteristics of those districts are. Again, that is leaning on mostly publicly facing data around census data for demographics, some other coastal resource data that we have in Mass Mapper around shoreline armoring and that kind of thing. So, that wasn't the 3 data sets I just talked through were the main data sets we used for the actual delineation of the boundaries. And then there's the descriptions, which is really what Nasser was walking through. Those summaries of how those districts are characterized, we do not have those available yet, if that it helps answer that question.
It does. Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, Janet. Ashley, go ahead.
Along those same lines, I was wondering on the data set that looks at sea level rise, does that consider or map any potential salt marsh migration areas? And if not, I have heard through the grapevine that there are some land trusts like the Nature Conservancy and Mass Audubon that might be also working together on doing some coastal resilience planning. Is that in conjunction with this work? Or is that something separate, if you know about that?
Nasser, do you want to answer that?
Sure. Well, because of the extent of the boundaries, which is the 2070 0.1% chance flood, there's very few areas where you'd expect marsh migration that are beyond those boundaries. We do look at the data I just put in a link in the chat to Coastal Zone Management's SLAM viewer, which is a sea level affecting marshes model. So there was an analysis done on future sea level rise and how resources might adapt to those conditions. And so we do frequently look at that information when, for example, in the district descriptions where we discuss kind of the timing of high marsh transitioning to low marsh or disappearing. We were referencing this data. So this data already exists. It's available. If you use ArcGIS, you can find and add to your maps data that CZM has published that kind of highlights areas of future migration specifically, where you don't have to click through the different time horizons and try to analyze where the change is happening. So I suggest taking a look at those if you're a savvy GIS user.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley, for the question. We have time for maybe one more question before we close. Okay. Tian, I'll hand it over to you to close.
Great. Thanks, Elizabeth. Well, thank you everyone for sticking with us for the last hour and a half. Again, we really appreciate it. Appreciate you making the time and for the great engagement. This has been extremely helpful. We're cataloging all of the feedback we've gotten through the Q&A, through the chat, through the Mentimeter. And so we'll definitely be taking that back. I encourage you all to, as I said, kind of keep track of the Resilient Coast landing page as we have updates on the planning process and future opportunities for engagement. They'll be posted there. We will send out an email to everyone who attended these meetings probably early next week with all of the links and next steps. And we really, hope that you will take the survey and that you'll share that with your friends and neighbors and colleagues so we can get the best participation on that as possible. As was said earlier today, your participation in this process is absolutely critical. We want widespread buy-in for this plan. It has to be done in partnership. There's no one entity that can implement this alone. And so you will all be really important partners as we move on to the implementation phase of Resilient Coasts. So again, thank you all so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.